Welcome to Art Toronto. My name is Mia Nielsen. I'm the director of the show, and this is our crypto conversation. Here, you're going to hear about the future of NFTs and digital art and how that relates to the physical world of artworks. We're going to hear from Samuel Arsenault-Brassard. He's a digital artist, architect, and collector of NFTs based in Montreal. He's here in conversation with Kirsten Hinder, co-founder of InfinityMark in Stockholm. Enjoy.
So, hi, Samuel. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Kirsten. Nice to meet you.
Where are you sitting at the moment?
I'm in Montreal.
Ah, nice. I did my undergrad in Montreal, so I was at McGill for 4 years. So it's my second favorite city in Canada. Yeah. I'm sitting at home in the Swedish archipelago. I actually live on an island these days. And I've really been looking forward to this chat because I think it's a great opportunity to sort of see the symbolism between the blurred lines between the physical and the digital art worlds. And as I'm coming from an analog art world perspective with a background in curation and art advisory, and I'm also a collector of physical art, it's super interesting to collide with your perspective coming from a very fully immersed place in the digital art world. So I'm really looking forward to this chat. So I thought we could start maybe by talking a little bit about unpacking NFTs, since we're working with them in very different ways. And a lot of people I know are still trying to understand what an NFT is. I think it's quite common that people sort of just say, okay, you know, the acronym means non-fungible token, but does that really mean anything to anyone who doesn't know what that is? Probably not. So I tend to get met with a blank look and then try to go further into a description to try to make it a bit easier to understand and describe them as a unique digital asset and something that has an inherent value. But unlike money, each NFT has a unique identity. So does that sound about like an explanation that you give people, or does everyone in your world just know exactly what NFTs are all about?
Well, I'm deeply ingrained in the community, so everybody in that community does know. Then there's a lot of new artists onboarding, and I tend to reach out a lot to artists and help them out, or even like artists in Montreal, I'll reach out to them and say, hey, have you considered NFTs, etc. And I spend a lot of time, well, my Saturdays often at the gallery, introducing people to VR, AR art that often is linked to NFTs. So the simple explanation I'll tell them is like, it's a new way to sell art online or art that doesn't exist in a way.
Right. Yeah, cool. So I'm working with NFT in a very different way than you. I have a company called InfinityMark, and we are using NFTs as a tool for verifying physical artworks and securing their provenance and ownership on a blockchain. So in practice, that means that we have a paint-like substance, a compound, that has a unique serial number built into it, and we tag a work with that. And then we sort of tether the physical artwork to a digital record of the artwork, which is the NFT. So it's a means of giving physical artworks a trusted digital record. And I know that you're working with NFTs in a very different way. So why don't you explain that?
Yeah, so whereas you're kind of bridging the gap between old and new, I'm a little bit more fully embedded in the new aspect of things. So I'm a collector. I reach out to a lot of artists too, both for helping or when I collect from them. I'm also an artist, so I do my own NFTs and I curate art shows, mostly in VR and AR, but the VR and AR world has been kind of slowly turning to NFTs as a way to sell art that has been problematic basically in the art industry because it quote unquote doesn't exist. So yeah, it's very embedded in that digital culture basically.
Right. So like your relationship to NFTs or one's relationship to NFTs really depends on what kind of stakeholder you are in the art world. And so from the perspective of an artist or gallerist or institution or in a collector of the analog art world, an NFT is more a technology that can be used to sustain something and to protect something or authenticate something. Sometimes I boil it down to saying that it's like a digital certificate of authenticity. It's more than that, but it's something that people can understand, because people who buy works of value are used to getting a certificate of authenticity with it. That's sort of like the record of the sale and their ownership. So I think this is sort of like next generation of that, like bringing that into the future, which I think is super exciting. And in your case, I'm thinking also that, you know, one of the reasons that NFTs must be super exciting for digital artists is that it's a way to protect the uniqueness of a work, whereas before you could just copy a digital file and create a new digital file and there wouldn't be a difference, right? There was nothing unique about them. They were just two copies of the same digital, for instance, a JPEG or another format. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the joke of like, oh, it's silly to sell it in an NFT. I'm going to right click and save the image, and that's really not, you know,
Funny.
that's the point. But it is. I mean, people have made NFTs of that joke and sold them for a lot of money. That's like, but yeah, NFTs. I mean, it can be extremely simple. You can literally take a photo, put it up there, give it a name, give it a number of edition and a price, and now it's an NFT and it's ready for sale. However, what's really interesting is all the new things that are emerging from that space, because the NFT is a smart contract and it's aware of itself and it's aware of its environment. And beyond that, like an NFT can also be a game. So for example, there's an artist who works in architecture that made an NFT that's a collaborative game. Anybody that goes on that page will see other users that are on there, and they can build an environment together collaboratively. So like that's really kind of pushing things. There's also a lot of mechanics for combining NFTs. So, you know, some silly collector stuff, you'll take like, let's say a bear and some sort of hat, and you destroy both of them, and all of a sudden you have a new NFT with a bear and hat. Obviously, that's not like fine art, but there's all of these mechanics that are evolving. Also, there's mechanics for like basically burning or destroying NFTs that will create new things. Some of the most interesting ones are, there was an artist that made a bunch of black and white generative art. And secretly what he did is later on he released colors. And if you bought those colors as NFTs, it would the old black and white art would understand that you had purchased those colors and now populate itself with the colors that you had created. Or another example is like an animation that is 6 months long, and it starts only when the NFT is sold or transferred. And so after the 6 months, it stops. So if the NFT doesn't keep changing hands, the art basically stops. So there's just a lot of new doors.
Sounds like there's a ton of creativity and different avenues to explore. Super interesting. I was thinking about collecting because, of course, like from my perspective, I've both sold and collected physical artworks. Everyone knows how that goes, either via a gallery or an auction house, or now more and more increasingly via social media. But I think there's a lot of confusion about how people are collecting and trading NFTs. Some people say it's a generational thing, that older collectors aren't interested because they're not tech savvy. But I meet collectors of all ages who say that they just don't know how to navigate these new platforms where NFT art can be collected or traded. And I met a collector just the other day who said, you know, I found out what the platforms were. I had money, I wanted to buy something, and he couldn't figure it out. And I think he's not the only one. I've heard that in a lot of cases, that people really find it hard to navigate, and we just need help with that. So I'm guessing that you have lots of experience of that, of course. So, you know, what do you think is like the best way to help people navigate? Because it's like new codes that people coming from the traditional art world haven't learned yet and haven't understood. It's almost humorous, like a reversal of the roles, when people say that the traditional art world is like, there's a high threshold and there are certain codes of behavior and it's not super open and accessible. But this is almost like turning the table and a reverse situation where people coming from the traditional art world don't really get access that easily.
Yeah, and there is sometimes, you know, we don't want to recreate what the traditional art world has been doing. We don't want that elitism. We don't want the things that there's some things from the traditional art worlds that are rejected in that sense. So How to get into it? It's for sure if you get guided by an artist, a gallery, another collector, perhaps that's the best. Probably the best thing is I would say if you're really beginner, probably a good place to start is this platform called Feralfile, because they are closer to the traditional art world. They're more curated. They accept traditional money as well as crypto. But if you are going to go more into a real crypto thing, I would say research and pick your platforms, and we'll talk about a few today. I'm personally on Hicketnunk, and there's different advantages to it there. But yeah, basically pick a platform, learn who the big players are, who the little players are. I really discovered a lot actually through collecting, going into artists' collections, or I see a piece sold for $2,000, like a relatively high price on Hicketnunk. So I go see, oh, who's collecting that? And then I see their collection. I find an artist, I see their collection, I go in their collection. It's kind of an infinite loop of discovery, as well as what's happening on social media. It's a very social thing. So
you follow the breadcrumb trail.
Oh yeah, I definitely went deep into the, following Alice in Wonderland in there.
Nice. I think it's nice to know that there are platforms that you can both use crypto or normal money to buy and sell, because I think that puts a lot of more traditional collectors at ease when they're just familiarizing themselves with this space and they're a little bit skeptical maybe about crypto. I know that you laughed when I said that the other day when we spoke, that if you're skeptical of crypto, that you shouldn't be buying NFT art in this space. But I think it takes time for people to customize themselves. So I think it's good that you have a choice and that it's not just leaping 100% into an unknown space without any security blankets. But yeah, super interesting. I had a reflection about collecting NFTs that you touched on briefly, but I thought we could just loop back to that. And that is that one piece of feedback I have personally, and that I hear all the time from artists, is that most of the platforms that are out there today are not curated. And some people say that that's like a way of democratizing the art world, the digital art world at least. And others say that a gatekeeper is needed to sort the bad from the good. So what are your thoughts on this? Since I've worked as a curator, I have I feel like I sort of have a need to know that everything has sort of passed under somebody's eye of approval, but I know that you have a different perspective on that. So why don't you share that?
Yeah, so there are some platforms that are not curated, where it's just, there's 10,000 items and go have fun. And maybe you can sort by price or sold and things like that. There are some platforms that are very curated, like Super Rare. They'll write articles. They only accept maybe 1% of the applicants, if that, and they present the work. There are platforms. Probably the most curated, I would say, is Feralfile, which once again is kind of closer to that traditional, aiming to please the traditional collectors while still introducing them to this new world. Now, on the world of Hicketnunk, which is a little bit more like anarchist, underdog, weird pirate ship, which is, the one I'm on, it's very much about like minorities and helping people from third world countries and helping people that are not generally, pushed to the front. So there's very much, they don't want likes, for example. They don't want an algorithm that just picks up the most popular stuff and makes it float at the top. They want basically kind of a equal level playing field. They don't want to just make a feedback loop that say, hey, here's the top 10 artists, and all of a sudden, 90% of the money is going to the top 10 artists. They want some random person with no social media to be on the same playing field as everybody else. And really, they fight back against that kind of algorithmic thinking.
Right. Yeah, super interesting. And isn't there also some spaces that are more artist curated, right? Like there's some kind of system for artists actually being the ones to democratically bubble up the works that they vote on somehow.
Yeah, or I would say also on Hicketnunk, there's a lot more artists collecting artists, and
Okay.
the traditional art world is not in there. It's artists that are getting rich. It's artists that are collecting kind of museum type collections, and it's like Nicolas Sassoon or Digital Coleman. These are artists that institutions are probably going to have to buy their collections from them in the future, because institutions were not there. They're 6 months plus late. So all of that antique digital art they completely missed on, and it's either sold out now or it's 100 times the price that it was if the institution would have been there participating.
I think they're definitely going to catch up, but yes,
that's the keyword, catch up.
The art world is a slow-moving beast, so you know how it goes, but they'll catch up. I was thinking one other thing that you touched on that I just wanted to mention again, because I think it's so important in terms of this, like it's partially connected to democratizing things and different power structures and putting the power in the hands of the creators, but this aspect of royalties. In Sweden, where I live, there is some system for regulating royalties of artists who are quite established. If their work sells at an auction house on the secondhand market, then they get a royalty if that happens in Sweden or maybe even Northern Europe, but globally there isn't a system for that. So I think one major advantage for artists who are either creating NFT art or connecting their physical art to a digital record in the form of an NFT is that, as you mentioned, a smart contract can be connected to that. So that's a huge advantage for artists who will then benefit from a royalty when their work exchanges hands down the line. And then one thing that I think is super interesting as well that I hope will evolve is that galleries can also benefit from a royalty in the same way. So if the artist and their initial gallerist create a smart contract together, that can also stipulate that the original gallery gets a royalty when the work sells further on. And having brought up, and I know you work in galleries as well, having had experience of, you spend several years really nurturing and bringing up artists, and then they get picked up by a bigger, international gallery and just walk out the door one day. You feel like all that time and energy that you invested, you can be very happy that they make a huge break, but you can also feel like when their work then sells for 10 times as much, it'd be nice to be able to benefit a little bit from that. So I hope that continues to grow and that people see sort of why it's nice to have a system instead of trying to like duck out of paying a small royalty, because I think both the artists and the original gallerists deserve that. So I hope that becomes more of a norm.
Right. I mean, there's also collaborators, like right now I'm making an NFT working with a musician. So we're getting close, or already there's some experimental things where he will get, let's say, 15 to 25% of every sale, and on resales as well. And now, personally, in terms of as an artist, let's say I give 25% royalty to my gallery. If I'm no longer with my gallery in 10 years, I'm not going to want them to have that percentage anymore, So, but the smart contracts will be right now, when you create a piece that's shared, it's just shared forever kind of thing. But the way I want it to be is much like the contract. If I'm right now, I'm represented by a gallery. If I leave them, I still have to give them, let's say, 25 or 50% of all my sales for 6 months. But then after I'm liberated. So I think the NFT contracts will be able to follow, whether it's that exact model or some more evolved, like it could say, okay, well, then it's 10% for a year and then it's 5% for 2 years or something like that.
Yep. Yeah. Interesting. I was thinking apart from the perspective that gallerists could potentially, now I'm back to my gallerist hat, that gallerists could potentially benefit from some kind of, at least initially, royalty as their artists that they sort of grew up move on. I was thinking also that, so people sometimes say, well, as artists gain more autonomy, is that going to have a negative impact on the situation for brick and mortar gallerists, which is sort of the world that I've been in. And I think, I know that it's often for galleries who are trying to keep their doors open, it's a struggle month to month, and that's sort of compounded by, the rise of digital platforms, and a lot of artists are selling their work on social media, which I think is great. But then it's sort of like, what is the role of the gallery at the end of the day? But I think also, in our case, since we're giving galleries a possibility to tag works and then create the NFT, it's sort of putting them in a central role again of being like the, verifiers and authenticators of the work that they're selling. And they could ultimately do that retroactively as well, together with their artists for works that have already been sold. So it's possibility for gallerists to sort of expand their offering and do something, add a new service, and that I think a lot of collectors are really interested in, because it helps those collectors of analog art sort of take a step into the digital world without feeling like they have to dive right in. Maybe they're not ready for that yet, but it's sort of like giving a digital identity to their physical works and having somebody to hold your hand while you're taking that step. So I definitely think that is a bright future for brick and mortar galleries, and I hope that they stick around, because I think they do play a really important role in the art world.
Yeah, there's a lot of pushback in the NFT world of like, oh, we'll get rid of all galleries, and how dare they take 50% and provide no value. Like, having worked with galleries, of course, galleries do provide a value that may not be comprehensible to artists that are not necessarily embedded in that world. But it is also a little bit of a Darwinian moment where, some people, there's new things, and some people are going to just completely ignore it. Some people are going to jump into it and thrive or not. And it doesn't mean that you have to even participate in that world. It just means there's a new world, and some people are going to go in and thrive, and it's a new opportunity. Some people are going to completely miss it. And yeah, I think you have a nice middle ground between the two, where you don't have to go 100% digital. But yeah, I would say for people that are interested, like, get involved, start learning, maybe find somebody that can guide you. Like, that's the thing, right? If I were to start as a NFT artist with no guidance, it would be 10 to 20 times harder than if I didn't have people to ask. Or I feel the same way when I help artists. It's like, okay, well, this probably seems super complicated to you, but if you just listen to me, we can get this done in an hour. And like, I kind of know the groundwork, so I can lead you there. But it's the same thing too with social media, right? Some people are still struggling to like open Facebook, whereas there's all of these opportunities on Twitter, Instagram, and all of these things, or having a good website. And I think one of the speculative futures I'm really interested in as a VR architecture nerd is these metaverse art galleries, where you can meet people online or show your collection online, and or even create an architecture that would be unbuildable in the digital world, where you can meet your clients, but you would never be able to afford to build that as a real physical gallery, and it still represents your brand and your aspirations.
Right. You mentioned the word speculation, and I think I just want to touch back on that, because I think one sort of misunderstanding, there was so much activity last spring in the auction space. Beeple is the one name that everybody remembers, but there have been several examples of really historic sales of NFT artworks. And I think a lot of people sort of stick to that really highly speculative side of things and the drama surrounding all of that, and everybody just wants to catch that wave. But then there's also a lot of pushback in terms of, from the traditional art world, a lot of collectors and gallerists and artists just say, oh, but that Beeple, that's not art. And it's just kind of interesting to see what an oversimplification it is, because it's like, it doesn't really matter. Of course, art is in the eye of the beholder, firstly, but also that explosive, yes, it could be a bubble. It may be, we'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, the technologies are still smart technologies that are here to stay. So it'll be interesting to see how people either reject or embrace, or somewhere in between. I think curiosity will take people a long way too, because it's something new and something that people see a lot of possibilities, both from the creator side and from the collector side. So super interesting. And with that, sorry, go ahead.
Well, there was something symbolic about Beeple. It's not fine art, etc. There's something symbolic about it, because he's been doing free art every single day for 11 years. So, without he's been getting paid in likes. So, like, give the guy $1. And like, if you look
or
into
69 million.
69 million, whichever, it depends on if you're a crypto millionaire or not. And like, you know, if you look at that in CryptoPunks and you're like, this is NFTs, well, you're missing the mark. Or there's collectibles in the NFT world, which I don't really care about. And then there's art. So don't look at the collectibles.
And there is in the physical art world too. There's a distinction there. You know, all art is not art, quote unquote, I would have to say.
The price
something that is created, it's not necessarily art.
Right. And like a high price doesn't mean it's good art. It just means you get some clickbaits.
True. I was thinking about I get the question a lot about the environmental impact of minting NFTs, and there's a lot of back and forth about, I know you know a lot about different platforms and different blockchains, and whether my understanding has been that it really doesn't make a difference, that at the end of the day, until Ethereum launches its 2.0 version, basically everything is equally destructive, environmentally speaking. But I know that you mentioned something different. So could you just remind me of what that was when we spoke the other day?
So there's two major blockchains that are used that work differently. So there's Ethereum, which is worth like $3,000 and has like any transaction you're going to do is going to cost, let's say, between $50 to $100 or $200, like on top, like as a kind of tax. And Ethereum has some environmental issues right now. There's a huge amount of electricity used generally. And as you mentioned, Ethereum 2.0 is supposed to come by the end of the year and should resolve that by like 98%. Now, right now, there's also Tezos, which is kind of like the underdog blockchain, which already doesn't have those environmental issues. So it's a lot less popular. There's a lot less money to be made. Tezos, is worth between $3 and $7 US instead of 3,000, and the gas fees are like 30 cents, like they're negligible. So a lot more accessible to people in third world countries that don't necessarily have $150 US to create a piece. And yeah, personally, I'm pretty much only collecting on Hicketnunk and which is on Tezos until Ethereum 2.0 comes by. Like I only have one piece on Ethereum.
Okay, nice. I was thinking, because I've worked here in Stockholm at a couple of different art institutions, and I remember when I started at the Modern Museum here that I used to almost feel like I was provoking conversations at the lunch table because I was asking, I don't understand why institutions can't trade works. Like if you look at a collection that is maybe 60,000 works and 95% of them will never see the light of day. I just know the magnitude of institutional collections and how much money it takes to maintain those collections, which in many cases, a lot of the works never even get shown. So I think NFTs have a lot of potential to solve that in the sense that there's a couple of different reasons. I think in one sense, because sharing between institutions, NFTs as a format, creating NFTs of physical works that are in a collection is one scenario, that those NFTs could then be shared amongst institutions who are doing exhibitions globally, which would severely decrease the carbon footprint of shipping works physically back and forth. So that's one aspect. And then I also think that there's a couple of museums, including, I don't know if it's just in Europe, but it doesn't matter what the names are, but there are a couple of museums who are creating NFTs, like limited edition NFTs of prominent works in their collections, and then selling the NFTs as a way to finance the maintenance of their collections. And we all know it's very expensive to run museums. So I think both of those things are super interesting. And I wondered if you had something to add to that from your point of view.
Well, as I mentioned, I'm kind of in the world of creating digital galleries that can be explored. And a big part of that is there's digital art, but then, there's real physical art. So there's some technologies like photogrammetry, where you just take like hundreds of photos of a sculpture, for example, and you can recreate the object in 3D. So I think does that
make it virtual, or is that different?
Yeah, like basically, I can take Rodin or whatever, a sculpture, scan it in 3D, and now I'm in VR and I'm in front of it, just like a visceral experience. So I think the Smithsonian, I think, has 3D scanned 75% of their collection or something like that. And that was a couple of years ago, so it may be much further. So that idea of 3D scanning the work and making it an NFT, I think, has a lot of value, because then, you know, you can have a dephysicalized museum, basically.
Yeah.
But,
super interesting. I know that people often say, oh, but you know, having a bodily experience of a physical art piece and sharing the same space with it cannot be replicated. But I think the technology is moving so quickly that it wouldn't surprise me if that's just around the corner. So super exciting.
yeah, there's new experiences too. Or like, for example, the Museum of Other Realities, it's a social thing. So you can go with your friends from Japan, Australia, Canada, US, and meet together in a space where, once again, you have architecture and art that just wouldn't be possible anywhere else. Or, for example, I remember going in there and there was a 3D scan of like churches from Austria or some European country, like very beautiful church. And you know, you could even put your hand on it, and when your hand would touch it, the controller would start vibrating. So it was kind of like touching the space that's there, but you did
this real haptic experience.
It's a new thing, you know, or it's like a movie, right? You're not in Antarctica, you're not on a mountain, but it's a movie. Like, movies can make us cry. Like, don't discard them.
Yeah, so it's so interesting. So that probably leads us to like, just, you know, what our visions for the future are. There's so many possibilities, but I was thinking like, you know, I think that the future is bright. There are a lot of possibilities. I think we can expect to see, like, from my perspective, you know, an increasing interest in creating digital records of physical works. And I think that is super exciting when you think of the rise of both the value of digital assets and also just knowing that the technology that we're living with is moving so quickly that it's not going to be too long before, you know, our lives are completely digitized. We're moving in that direction. So I think it's super interesting to think of how to bridge the physical and the digital and make sure that the things that we love to collect today that are analog art pieces and physical objects, you know, how can we bring those with us into the future? So that's what we've thought a lot about with our concept, is just how to help people sort of over the threshold. And it's not about, you know, either collecting physical things or digital things, but graying the area between them and making it possible for people to experience their physical things in new digital senses using these new technologies. I saw an interview with was it with an artist? I think it was Misha Khan, who did an article through Christie's, and he likened NFTs to medieval tapestries and said something like, you know, in medieval times, when somebody stormed the castle and burned it down, it was the tapestries, because they were so portable that you could throw under your arm and escape with. The paintings, they weren't worth that much because they just got left on the walls. They weren't possible to take with you. So I thought, this makes me smile. I think it's interesting to know, okay, so we love these physical objects. So what are we going to do with them in the future? Or how are we going to best benefit from them in the future? So what are your perspectives on the future, Samuel?
So I'm a virtual reality and augmented reality nerd, and as well as architecture and art.
So you're already in the future, totally.
I'm trying. The headset's not there yet, but I'm ready for them. And so, you know, I'm really looking at what does the gallery of the future look like? And part of it is physical. And I'm also focusing a lot of my collection on 3D art, whether it's 3D scanned or made. Actually, I love sculpture that is made in VR, which is what I do personally as well. And so I think right now it's kind of hard to show that work. But as the technology evolves, it's going to be easier and easier. And that work is going to gain value as it gets easier to show it and experience it in a visceral way. So I think galleries, you can start thinking of galleries and architecture as having an augmented reality component. A layer that you can only see with a headset. You know, it's easy to build a cube, but then you can build a fantastical layer on top of it without having to worry about, do I even have the space? Do I have the material? Is this possible to build? It's just kind of like your imagination is kind of the limit, and the amount of work you put into it, not the cost of the material or the possibility of it. And then there's even more possibilities in VR, although it's not physical. You're not going to see a real person in front of you. But in VR, you know, there's metaverses now, which means like entire worlds or cities that are interweaved with each other. So you can have, like, I'd love to have a neighborhood where there's just a bunch of galleries, and kind of one of my goal is to become a gallerist or an art trader or whatever you want to call it in these worlds, as well as kind of creating virtual AR galleries, just kind of pushing the limit on that sense of things. So I think, yeah, the VR AR world, NFTs, and especially 3D NFTs are going to kind of converge into the future, and that's where I'm most excited about, that kind of speculative future.
Very cool. I think we've turned pretty much every stone we have time for today, but super interesting to get your perspectives. And it's like, yeah, we have the common ground of the technology, but two different approaches to it, and it's very healthy and interesting to share perspectives and just to know what's happening in your world. So thank you so much for chatting with me.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for chatting.